What's the biggest bullet you've ever dodged? Sold my bar and grill business in August 2019. This one just materialized yesterday. Actually, about a year ago at my job I was offered to switch from my current team where I was established for a few years, had seniority, etc., for a new department that just started to kick it off. Right processes. Basically start from square one. A lot more work for the same amount of pay. I figured it and went. Yesterday they announced that they just closed the physical HQ office for my old department. And everyone in that entire part of the company would have to either move to one of 14 random states that we can pick. It's chosen basically by a roulette wheel for where you're going, to a local office. Or they are going to be fired on the 22nd of June. Thankfully, since I'm part of the new department, I wasn't included in that mandate. Phew. I was a teen driver not paying attention at an intersection at the crest of a hill with low visibility when the light turned green. The car behind me honked, and just as I was about to go, a truck barreled through the red light on the perpendicular road at decidedly ludicrous speed. If I had been paying attention and gone when the light turned green, I very likely would have been T-boned to death. Closest call I've ever had. Years ago I was on a first meet for an internet date. We met at a bar and the bartender carded us. Even though we were both older, they were doing stings in the area, so he was carding every single person. Handed mine right over, but my date was an ass about it. The bartender checked mine and handed it back to me. He checked his, and rather than handing it back to him, he placed it on the bar right in front of me. It had the SZUL offender stamp on it. The guy picked it up, looked at the bartender, looked at me, and then got up and walked out. I immediately googled him. He was on the registry and had been in prison for RP. Lesson learned. Always Google. The bartender and I are still friends. Grandma got a flat tire. Pulled over. As she was on the side fixing the tire, her car was hit and totaled. Right from her hands. She was okay. I was out kayaking on a lake and several bullets whizzed by me. There was a distinct crack buzz sound as it went by. I think some people were just out plinking in their backyard, adjacent to the lake, and didn't think a backstop was necessary. This also happened to me a few weeks later when I was paddling on a small stream. Bullets whizzed by above the bank, just over my head. I don't think anyone knew I was there either time. Regardless, when you go out and shoot stuff, make sure there's a backstop. FFS. Also, I don't know how big the bullets were, so I'm unsure which was the biggest bullet dodged. I was working in an amusement park during college summers. I used to come home from college on a Friday afternoon and usually pick up a Friday shift as well as a full weekend. During the month that the park was only open on weekends, I was a manager at my attraction. One particular Friday, I got home and was too exhausted to do a Friday night shift, so I bagged it and decided to just work the Saturday, Sunday and be back at school on Monday. I got a call from a good friend and co-worker telling me that our attraction was in flames. There were casualties, and a couple of my friends and co-workers were missing. 7 people lost their lives. My co-worker, assistant manager, went back in and pulled people out to safety. He was okay. I was in shock for a few days. Had I done what I usually do, I would have been there in charge. And I know I would have gone in to help. It could have been an entirely different situation. So yeah, I dodged a bullet. But a devastating event happened. I'll never know. I was booked on Pan Am Flight 103, which went down over Lockerbie, Scotland. I didn't have a premonition or anything supernatural. I just decided to cancel my seat. Didn't think anything of it until the plane went down and my mother had written down my flight plan and reminded me. This was back in the day when you could cancel without a penalty up to a couple of days in advance. Edit, you know. When I posted my response, I didn't realize how many comments I would get that involved people who were impacted by this sad event. On any given day, we make decisions for no concrete reason really. Like, I just chose not to go that day, and we come to learn it was a good decision. I try not to evaluate my decision because I don't want to affect my future decisions by second guessing or trying to work the odds. This is only one example of times that I dodged a significant bullet. I wrote a different post, but erased it before I hit save. I matched with a guy on Tinder who played for the Atlanta Falcons. He was really charming and seemed nice. He asked me to fly down to Atlantic City for Memorial Day weekend. Said he would pay for everything, airfare, hotel, food, etc. But I had never met him before and he refused to give me his phone number. I was uncomfortable flying to meet a stranger, so I told him no. 2 weeks later he was on the news for kicking and killing his girlfriend's dog. 2005. My friend and I evacuated New Orleans 2 days before Hurricane Katrina and drove to Mississippi with the little money we had. We were trying to decide on where to stay for the night, and it was between a mid-range hotel or a really cheap motel. Decided to spend a little more for the hotel. During the night the eye of the storm came through Mississippi and flattened the roof of the motel we decided against. I was subletting an apartment in college and got zapped by the electric stove. Gave notice immediately and moved out with very clear reasons why I was moving out. The building burnt a few weeks later. Edit. Well, this blew up. Thanks, kind Redditors. Physically? A bus. I grew up in Bermuda. And since it is such a small island, cars are limited to one per family. And everyone drives mopeds. I was driving into town and came up to a red light behind a bus. As is tradition, I scooted around the bus to be in the front of the line of traffic. Literally 2 seconds later a second bus smashed into the back of the first bus at like 30 miles per hour. I would have been pancaked. Without question. 100% dead. I just sat on the side of the road for a bit and thought about my mortality. Edit. Thank you for the awards. My only other Bermuda bus-based encounter was driving home from my first job in the rain. An oncoming bus in the opposite lane went through a massive puddle and sent what looked like a tidal wave of water right at me. It literally picked me and my little Yamaha V50 right up and swept us off the road onto some grass. So I guess in the end it was me. One bus is one. Not me. A Dutch mate of mine living in Tasmania had to visit his sick mum in Amsterdam. Booking his flight online. He said to his wife, "You know, I'm sick of flying Malaysian Airlines. The foodies, the hosties are miserable. It'll cost more. But I'm booking with Singapore." So, instead of dying on MH17, he was on a plane 40 kilometers ahead of it. Edit. Just to clarify. I really needed a job and the manager at a dispensary in my area offered me a spot. I said no and 4 days later they were raided and everyone got arrested. About 6 months after I left my ex, he got caught assisting a 12-year-old. He was 34 at the time. Edit. I had the wrong age. He was 34 when it started. By the time he was in jail he was 36. I got on an intercity bus and almost sat in the middle but moved and sat at the back. The bus later collided with a truck and got opened up like a tin can. If I had sat where I originally intended I would have been killed. My ex-girlfriend moved out of my house a day before the first lockdown in Spain. She previously pulled a knife on me. I had 2 job offers in different states at the same time. The one I didn't take was offering more money. But I just didn't gel with the guy who would be my boss and really liked the guy who would be my boss at the lower offer. The better offer was in a state I had always wanted to live in. For a company I admired. But something felt off, so I went with the lower offer. I ended up meeting my wife in the city of the lower offer. Meanwhile, the company that had given me the higher offer abruptly closed and laid off their entire staff with no severance. So if I had taken that I would have been stuck on the other side of the country with no job and no money. Was driving on a freeway in the right lane when there was a sudden traffic jam ahead. I slammed on my brakes and was about to swerve onto the shoulder when I noticed that I wasn't sure the semi behind me could stop, and I didn't know how long we actually had a shoulder. Construction was happening at the time. Made the decision to rear end the car in front of me to stay off the shoulder. The truck went onto the shoulder. Brakes squealing. And finally managed to stop when the back tires of their trailer were level with me. Good thing we weren't in a center lane and that we happened to have a shoulder at that moment. As a bonus, I stopped in time and didn't hit the car in front of me after all. Though I would have happily taken that hit, and hopefully only would have shook up the people in front of me, in place of literally being hit by a truck. You have some good split-second decision-making skills. A few months ago I was driving on I-80 at night when out of nowhere the biggest buck I'd ever seen is in the middle of my lane. I did exactly what you're not supposed to do and swerved. And thankfully managed to keep the rear of the car content with it. I literally shaved that buck's ass. My mirror was folded in. I know you're not supposed to swerve. But I drive a tiny little thing and that buck's body would have gone through my windshield into my and my wife's face at 70 miles per hour. A year ago, almost to the day, I was offered a new job. It was exactly what I was looking for and was really excited. They told me they would email the contract, but after a week I hadn't had anything. After a lot of chasing they told me they'd change the structure of the organization so the position wasn't available. I have a month's notice for my current job, and if I had taken the job my notice period would have been after the cutoff date for furlough in the UK. The new job was in an industry that collapsed through the pandemic and the industry I work in has boomed. If I had received that email I would have probably been close to bankruptcy now. Attempted suicide. Ended up passing out in some bushes near the train station. Early the next morning. A girl I went to high school with, who I barely knew, saw me while she was boarding the train for a college interview early in the morning. She recognized me and told the conductor. He dismissed me as a junkie who just needed to sleep it off. She said, "I know him. He does not do drugs or drink. Call 911 now. 3 days in a coma. etc. etc. I am very grateful." Edit. I expected this to be an into the ether cathartic post that would go fully ignored. Thank you for showing your humanity. Internet. I promise to update when things come together. My first ever boyfriend dated me when I was 14 and he was 16. We only dated for 1 week before he took me into the woods and forced me to kiss him. I started to feel a psyche and broke it off that same day. 5 years later I found out that he was now imprisoned for raping 2 14-year-old girls. Not me, but my friend. We were in a bar and she was talking to a dude she met on Tinder. When she turned around I saw him put something into her beer. I walked up, pretended to stumble, and knocked it out of her hand. Apologized. Told her I'd buy her next beer. And when we walked over to the bar I told her what he did. We left right after. Decided to grab a case of beer and play Mario Kart that night instead. I only tagged along because she asked me to. Which I'm always perfectly happy to do. Glad I did. Finishing up my paper route when I was a kid. Walking home on the sidewalk next to a busy road with sister on the inside. Me dragging our little buggy on the outside. Middle of winter. Car jumps the curb and takes out our buggy. Neither of us know what the hell had just happened other than the ungodly SCR-ping sound and that our buggy was gone. Find out later that the driver saw us run home scared and brought back our buggy, which was utterly destroyed in a crumpled heap. I was pulling the cart and my hand was on it, so I'm not sure how I avoided eating chrome that day. Not a single scratch on me. I still think about it regularly and it's been over 30 years. That time I didn't go along for the ride when a friend of mine was running weed, years ago. Back when it was more illegal. I was bored and unemployed at the time. And passed on this trip because I had to go to a job interview to be a zombie for Halloween festivities at an amusement park. I got the job. My friend got arrested and did 30 days in jail. I found an explosive device in a National Guard training area when I was 14. It had little pull string and a metal plate to attach it to a tree. I held the thing in my hand and almost pulled the string but decided to attach it to a tree instead and put on a longer pull string. I pulled the string and it blew a 5-inch hole in the tree. The explosion was so loud the police came and it made the local news. They didn't catch me. I would have lost at least one hand. Maybe both or worse. They didn't catch me. Close bracket. I'm sure you would have gotten warned to call for help if you ever found something like that again. But you wouldn't have gotten into trouble for finding some old military ordnance. I broke my lease and moved out of a terrible apartment complex I was living in to move back home because I was broke. 2 weeks later the whole complex burned to the ground from a meth lab in another unit. A few edits for some commonly asked questions. The apartment was right outside of downtown Birmingham. I didn't have renter's insurance. Broke 20yo at the time, so wouldn't have got any kickback from that. I did end up getting my security deposit back which they said I had forfeit by breaking the lease, so that was nice. That meth lab wasn't mine. I was supposed to hang out with a couple of friends one night. We were going to go to a party that we were all invited to the weekend before. I asked to get off work early so I could go to the party. My manager let me go early. So I went to go find my friends. But I had a really bad feeling all day and it just kept getting worse. Instead of turning left to go to my friend's house, I went right and went home. I found out a few weeks later that they got busted with cocaine in their car. They were 16 and 17 at the time. I was 18. So I would have been screwed. Had a friend who asked if I wanted to move to CA with him and his family. I was 16 and thought it sounded fun. I didn't know at the time, but he was actually rescuing me from my insane mother and a not so happy home life. When you are abused, sometimes it is hard to know you are abused until you become an adult and gain a perspective. I shudder to think what would have happened to me if I had stayed there. I used to roller skate as a kid outside my house down a hill and never wore any kind of protection. Suddenly one day before I go out my older brother tells me I can't leave unless I put on a helmet. Which is weird since he's never cared before. Anyways, I do it, and that day, for the first time ever, I fell and landed on the back of my head so hard that the helmet cracked. That crack would have probably been my skull had I not wore it. Once at a bar a woman was surprisingly into me as we danced. If I had had more confidence back then I definitely could have taken her home. In the end, one of my karaoke buddies ended up with her instead and got caught by her husband that night. I knew a guy that got stabbed by the husband after he went home with a woman. Apparently she liked seeing the husband go crazy on the dude she brought home. 9mm. Christmas. 2008. Me and Lil Bro were opening gifts on the living room and a bullet came through our crappy roof, landing a few centimeters away from where we were. People who fire guns into the air are worthless. In 1996, my parents were deciding between two houses to move into. They picked the new construction that resulted in being placed on shoddy soil and years of lawsuits when we ultimately moved in 2001. Anyway, the other house they could have picked, presumably on better soil, would have placed my older sister at Columbine High School as a freshman for the 1998 to 1999 school year. Reading this at first like this doesn't seem like a dodge blow. 2 consecutive seizures from alcohol withdrawal the day I checked into rehab without detoxing. I was told afterwards that it was 50/50 that I survived that night. I'm currently just a couple months shy of 5 years sober. Not me but my dad. He traveled to London for work back from 2001 to 2007. He was booked for the day off on the 7th of July 2005, as that is my birthday, and the train he normally got to work was one of the ones that was bombed by terrorists. Edit. I wasn't born in 2005, just to clarify. I almost fell for a pyramid scheme in high school. My friend brought me to one of their meetings, ACN, and I was so on board. But my parents talked me down. I was upset at them until I learned more about MLMs and quickly changed my mind. Sometimes I imagine where I'd be now if I went through with it. It wouldn't be pretty. That's for sure. Got chucked off a horse. Hit the ground so hard I felt my soul leave my body. Started to cough up blood and was having trouble breathing within 30 seconds. Rushed to the hospital and the doctors were running down the hallway with me on a backboard. Doctors running is always a bad sign. I was sure I was dying. Come to find out that I broke 2 bones in my back and collapsed a lung. Once I was more with it, a nurse handed me my helmet and said, "It's a good job you were wearing this." It had been cracked almost in half. If I hadn't been wearing it, that would have been my head. And I'd most certainly be dead or permanently disabled. Wear your helmet, kids. Meet a guy years ago. Thought we were friends. Got into contact with him few years ago. He was acting sketchy, so I unfriended him. I look him up, found out he on sex offenders registry. High school GF wanted to talk about baby names. I was headed to college. No thoughts of being a parent. My mom even found a note in my pocket listing her favorites if we had a boy. Anyway, we broke up after 2 years. The next guy she dated was a dad with a 9.5 Moss. When I was about 10 years old, I leaned backwards onto a tall bookcase shelf, which happened to have a sword collection on the highest shelf. Many of these swords had their blades exposed for show. And what would happen at that very moment? That shelf gave way and all of the swords came and landed on me, including my head. Surprisingly, I got not a single cut, no concussion, and only a small bruise on the head. And being young, I dismissed this incident with gracious forgetfulness. Bookcase of Damocles. I was 18 and nearly went to work as a live-in housekeeper for a single man overseas. I naively thought it was going to be a straightforward cleaning arrangement. And somehow my parents never thought to raise any concerns. Luckily I changed my mind and took a nanny job with a family instead. Not me, but my dad. COVID saved his life. He was having trouble breathing and general signs of heart trouble. Middle of the night. Woken up to a panic. My mom's first instinct was to drive him to the hospital. About 20 minutes away. On their way out of the driveway, my mom realized that the ER was going to be full of people with COVID and didn't know where to take him. She went back into the driveway and called for an ambulance. About 5 minutes later, thank God they were closed, the paramedics showed up. Right as my dad collapsed. They were able to revive him and sustain him until they could get him to where he needed to go. If my mom had stuck to her plan of driving him 20 minutes to the hospital, he would have died in the car on the freeway. I know COVID has screwed a lot of things up for a lot of people. But for me, it's been a blessing in disguise. I once met a girl at a bar a few years ago. She was hot and she started a conversation with me. I don't remember about what. But at the end of it I wanted to ask her out. But being extremely shy I couldn't. If she hadn't started to talk to me I would have just admired and avoided her. Being a big and awkward guy. Anyway, I went to the bathroom to clear my head and when I came back I saw my friend who I came with asked her out. A total dick move because I told him I wanna ask her out. And I just stand there with an awkward smile waiting for them to leave so I could drink my anger away. Couple of days after that a mutual friend said that that friend from the bar was robbed by a girl he had brought to his apartment. So still today I get mixed feelings when I see him. Edit. Thanks for taking the time and reading my story. I just wrote about an incident in my life. Didn't think it would get any awards. Thank you. Friends and I went to the top of Bunker Hill in Boston. It's 294 steps and they are straight up. At the top I took a picture of them and backed up a little to get them in the view. After the picture I turned around and realized there was no rail and I had almost stepped directly into the hatch leading down the stairs. I moved a dresser into the basement at my mom's house before I moved out. I lost my grip and fell down almost an entire flight of stairs against a solid cinder block wall. The dresser right behind. Somehow I managed to walk away unharmed. It was unlikely to kill me. But I'm still surprised I walked away without being hurt or breaking something. The human body treads that fine line between surviving deadly catastrophes multiple times and eyeing itself up for life if you turn your head wrong.